Mr. Clerk, the time is 6 o'clock. I'm going to call this special meeting of council to order. Town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. Shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. I get a motion to approve the agenda. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Weiss, comments, questions? Mr. Clerk, we do any scribe? No? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. One item, development charges and bylaw public meetings for the 2024 development charges. We have a presentation to be provided by Byron Tan, Manager Watson and Associates, Economist Limited. Mr. Tan, welcome. The floor is yours.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, staff, and the public. Appreciate being in front of you today to provide a presentation on the 2024 development charge background study. Today is a mandatory public meeting under the Act, so I'll be providing some presentation slides, overviewing the process, and then at the end of it, happy to answer any questions. So just with the format of the public meeting, as you see, we did the opening remarks. I'll go through the public meeting purpose. As I said, it's a mandatory public meeting under the Act. And then we'll go over some of these items as you see on the screen, such as the study process and timelines, the overview of the DC, as well as the presentation of the proposed policies and charges that are presented to you today. If there's any members of the public that wish to speak, this is the opportunity to do so as well. And then I'd be happy to take any questions for the presentation. Now, keep in mind, today's meeting, there is no decisions to be made. It is a public meeting, so it is for your information at the end of the day. And the public meeting is to provide a review of the DC process and get the input from the public. And we are meeting the required timelines from the Development Charge Act. We released the study back in January of last month. And the study has to be released a minimum of 60 days prior to council's consideration of the bylaw. So we will come back to council in March prior to for your consideration of the Development Charge bylaw. Just to give you an overview of the draft of the study process and timelines, we started working with the town and staff back in June of 2023. Since that time, we've worked with staff to get the data compilation, undertake all the policies, data input, as well as all of the calculations. And through that time, we essentially provided draft findings by November, so basically the fall of 2023. Through that process, we've had a couple of engagements with the development community. We held a stakeholder presentation with them in mid-September, after which we then came back to council and provided you with a workshop on the process, as well as some preliminary perspective on the changes to the Act through Bill 23, which I'll also document and provide this evening. Subsequent to that workshop, we then finalized the calculations and then had a second meeting with the stakeholder community to provide the capital projects, discuss the calculations, as well as the policies that would be implemented within the draft DC bylaw. We then took their comments and finalized the report by January 23rd, 2024. And now we're here today to undertake the public meeting. And I understand subsequent to this meeting, there will be another council meeting to go over the development charges in March during your general committee. And then as well, to meet that 60-day timeline, we'll be back to council on March 26th for your consideration of the bylaw. So just to give an overview, development charges, it's not new. It is available, for municipalities to pass via bylaw under the Development Charges Act. So it is a revenue tool to be able to recover capital costs associated with residential and non-residential growth within a municipality. The capital costs are in addition to what you would typically request under your subdivisions or other localized servicing that a developer would typically provide through a subdivision or any localized works, such as internal roads, water mains, etc. And as I mentioned, development charges, again, they're not mandatory, but you do have the ability to impose them under the Development Charge Act. With that being said, there were a number of changes that were touched upon during your development charge update back in 2021. And one of the bills, particularly Bill 197, essentially isolated the number of services that we can collect for under the under the DCA. And what you have on the screen here is a list of 20 services that are still eligible under the Development Charge Act for collections. And of this amount, the ones in blue are the ones that we've included as part of your DC bylaw. And these are historically services that you've already provided for and have been collecting in prior bylaw iterations. And as you can see, it's water, wastewater, services related to highway, which is really your roads, public works, facilities, fleet, etc. Fire protection, library, and parks and recreation. And as you'll see, with Bill 23, and I'll touch upon that in a moment, it did remove the eligible service of housing services. While it doesn't affect the town, it does affect the region's development charge. So again, just to provide a recap, this was provided as information back in October to council. But we did undertake the town's, 2021 DC updates. And through that process, we did identify a number of changes to your bylaw with respect to the following bills you're seeing on the screen. Bill 108, 138, 197, and 213 really provided for those revisions to your 2019 bylaw, which included adding timing of provision payments, adding definitions, new exemptions, as well as other definitions that needed to be incorporated as part of your 2019 bylaw. Subsequent to that time, Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, and Bill 134, the Affordable Homes and Good Jobs Act, came into force, and that further, revised the development charge study as you see it today. So again, just to give you an overview, Bill 23, it was passed in November 28, 2022. And the bill amended a number of pieces of legislation, including the Development Charge Act, Planning Act, as well as others. And at the end of the day, it had a reduced, a negative impact to the revenues that a municipality could collect. A number of reductions were included, a number of exemptions, as well as a number of administrative items that now municipalities have to adhere to. With that being said, this slide should be familiar to you from back to in the October presentation, but essentially just going down the list here, what Bill 23 and Bill 134 provided was to add additional exemptions with respect to affordable units as well as attainable units. Now, you'll see at the above section there where affordable units, when they were first introduced, the notion was that if the rent was no more than 80% of the average market value, or if the purchase price was no more than 80% of the market value, then those would be considered affordable. Since that time, through Bill 134, they've actually revised that to actually have an income qualifier to it. So that's what you'll see at the bottom of the screen there, where for example, for an owned unit, it must cost less than 30% of the 60th percentile of the income of the household, or alternatively for rent, it should be 30% of the 60th percentile of income. While that may sound like a mouthful, we do have a calculation there to demonstrate, whatever the bulletin may pass at the end of the day, we should be able to calculate what that 30% looks like, in terms of an affordability calculator. However, those bulletins are not out yet. So these calculations, while we have it ready, it's still not available because we're not sure what that 60th percentile will be for the town of Aurora. Similarly, there's attainable units, which are not considered affordable or rental units. And it's to be sold to a person who's arm's length. Again, these definitions have not been properly defined yet, and we are still waiting for the outcome from the province to provide these definitions. So while these are out there in the DC realm, they're not currently in force. But we have written it in your bylaw in case it does come up that you don't have to update your bylaw again. And then going down the list, we have the other services, the other exemptions that are currently in force. Right now, if you do have inclusionary zoning units, if there are any affordable units under those areas, those would be exempt. Nonprofit housing, historically, they used to be able to pay DCs over 20 years, 21 installments. Now they're just completely exempt at the end of the day. And then additional residential unit exemptions. This was just tweaked a little bit. Historically, a resident could, intensify their existing residential home by adding 2 apartments as long as they don't more than double the size of the home. Well, they've changed that regulation to remove that clause. So you could still add 2 additional units, but they remove the size requirement. So there are a little bit of nuances there, but it is all documented within your development charge bylaw. Moving forward, again, you would have seen this where the rental housing discount is now in effect. So if there are any, rental-based developments, they would get a discount based on the number of bedrooms. 1 bedroom getting a 15%, 2 bedroom getting a 20%, and then 3 bedrooms or more getting a 25% discount. And then with the addition of the other reductions, I already mentioned the housing. There's also the capital cost amendments where they've removed studies and land. Now, I'd just like to note that while they have removed studies, the province is undertaking an examination through their committees to investigate the studies as an eligible service again, as well as taking a look at the mandatory phase-in. So that is something that is in the works that was announced back in December. So we will monitor that and keep the town apprised of anything that comes up of that process. Similarly, with the capital cost amendments, they do say that there will be land that will be excluded as a capital cost. However, the minister has not prescribed which services are, for which land would be excluded. So until that time occurs, all land within your DC bylaw would still be included until we are told otherwise that there is a service that is now being prescribed. I already kind of mentioned the mandatory phase-in. As you provide a new DC bylaw, the very first year, you can only implement 80% of the maximum calculated amount. But then every year thereafter, you can increase it by 5%, going to 85, 90, 95, and then 100 by year 5. Now, you are still allowed to index. So by year 2, you would be at 85% plus whatever your indexed rates are. And then the historical service standard, again, this is more for staff and ourselves to go through the calculations, but we now had to look at a 15-year time horizon historically rather than a 10-year. So we just have to go through memory lane a little bit deeper than over just a 10-year period. Again, just lastly, there's some DC administration items that have come out of Bill 23. The maximum interest rates that you can now impose on the rate freezes as well as installment payments is actually the average prime rate plus 1% of the large banks. And we track that as well. So, if staff ever required whatever the rates are currently, we're more than happy to provide that. And then there is this requirement to allocate 60% of your reserve fund earnings at the beginning of the year for water, wastewater, and services related to a highway. Now, the words are spend or allocate. So allocate does not mean that you have to spend the money right away. It just means that you have to make sure you're at least earmarking it for a project, whether that project takes place this year, next year, 5 years from now, as long as you're making sure that the reserve funds are being allocated in that fashion. And then the DC bylaw expiry has been extended to 10 years. So with that being said, so with the background out of the way, the DC methodology, this is a fairly simplified step. The act has over 80 plus sections with hundreds of subclauses as well. So this 6 steps really narrows it down for everybody. But essentially, we identify the amount, type, and location of growth. And once we identify the growth, then we need to take a look at the servicing we need to accommodate that growth. So, for example, for parks and recreation, we need to identify servicing, let's say for 8,000 people. Then number 3, where it says identify the capital costs, that's where we then identify specific projects. So the first number 2, while it sounds similar to number 3, number 2 just says we need this service. Number 3 then says, well, what capital do we need to achieve that service? Once we identify that, then we deduct a number of items, grants, subsidies, and other contributions, benefit to existing development, the amounts in excess of the 15-year service standard calculation, and then any reserve funds that you may have collected from the prior bylaw. Once you get that, then you get the net costs, which we must divide between residential and non-residential developments. And then from there, we then divide those costs that are allocated to those 2 categories by the growth forecast. So in simple terms, we have the cost of infrastructure divided by the residential or non-residential growth to get your development charge either on a per unit basis or a per square meter or per square foot. So just with respect to the servicing of the new users, I mean, this slide just means to demonstrate that at the end of the day, if you are growing and you have to provide infrastructure to the new users, there is this relationship where you don't have to have development charges, but if you still have to have growth, then really those informations would come from rates, taxes, or reserves. So really the development charges are just meant to offset the items that are located within the right-hand side. Similarly, while we can talk about the revenues, there are a number of exemptions you must adhere to, which Bill 23 only added to. So as you can see on the list, there is that relationship with the region and yourselves. So if you're constructing a building, you won't pay a regional DC. Likewise, if they were constructing something, they don't pay the town DC. And same goes with school boards. You do have an industrial building expansion exemption, which is mandatory. And then any lands that would be designated for university that receives operating funds from upper levels of government, they would be exempt from DCs as well. And I've touched upon all the ones in yellow, which are really from the Bill 23. And then we go on with discretionary exemptions, which does provide for items that council can add at the end of the day. So you can reduce the DC in whole and in part if you'd like. You can also exempt certain types of classes or different types of developments. So, for example, you can exempt churches, or all places of worship or agricultural, or you could just exempt a whole charge completely, such as industrial, or even, again, anywhere from 0 to 100% of the calculated charge. You may phase in over time, but Bill 23 has done that for you anyways. So if you wanted to do a little bit more, you can do that. But that is now mandatory, at least with the 80%. And then there's redevelopment credits. So while not being specific to the act, if my house burnt down, let's say, knock on wood, I hope it doesn't, I should be allowed a period of, let's say, 4 to 5 years to be able to rebuild it without having to pay a development charge. These are your current discretionary exemptions under your current bylaw. So you do have private schools, burial grounds, places of worship, the non-residential uses as per Section 39 of the Planning Act. If there's a building permit that's not creating new floor area, again, the agricultural use, public hospitals, and you do currently have that university exemption as a discretionary one, but now that it's mandatory, really it's still falling within your bylaw. So at the end of the day, through discussions with staff, all of these exemptions are proposed to continue in the draft bylaw unless otherwise stated by council. Now, just going into the meat of the analysis, we do have the growth forecast summary here. Through the DC study, we worked with staff as well as the planners to determine that, what the infrastructure that we were provided from the capital program, it really was meant to service a 10-year forecast. So the 10-year forecast you're seeing on the screen here is what the basis is for the capital program and the capital budget that we have within the DC study. So this provides a summary of the growth within the report. For your population, we are estimated to increase by about just under 13,400 people over the next 10 years. That translates to about 5,900 units and a non-residential gross floor area of about just under 4 million square feet. In terms of the services being included, we already touched upon that in one of the earlier slides. But as you can see here, we are looking at fire protection services, services related to a highway, public works, again, which is part of your services related to a highway, which touches upon your depots and domes, your facilities, as well as your fleet. We do have parks and rec, library services, water, and wastewater services as well. Now, in terms of your current charges, you just index at the beginning of the year. So right now, your residential rates are located on the screen here, with your largest one being the single and semi-detached dwelling units. As you can see, for a home that's receiving full services, the charge is just over $36,600. And then as you go from left to right, as the unit size goes smaller and the number of people within it are smaller, the corresponding charges also drop. So multiples, which are your true townhomes, that's about $27,000. And then you have the large and small apartments based on the size. So that's about $22,150, and then just under $15,200 for the small apartments. You also have a special dwelling unit charge. And this is really more for your retirement home, special care homes, almost like the assisted living. So we actually have a charge pretty much on a per bedroom basis. So that's the lowest charge, as you can see there, at $11,300. And then correspondingly for your non-residential developments, you do have a charge per square meter. And this is for all non-residential, and it's about $69.49 per square meter. Through the calculations within the development charge study, we were able to provide the revised charges here. And as you can see, it is just slightly higher than what you're collecting for now. And that's a function of, again, extending on the fact that we are looking at your 10-year budget, which really mirrors the growth forecast as well as what was identified through the previous DC study back in 2018, 2019. So as you can see, the corresponding charge, for single detached dwelling units right now is $37,147. And as I said, as you go down the list, with the smaller unit types with lesser PPUs, the charge then, starts to go down. So for multiples, we're just under 28,500. And then for the large and small apartments, it's about just under 21,000 and just over 14,000 respectively. On the non-residential side, we've provided it for both the square feet and square meters for those of you that like to look at it maybe one way versus the other. So on a per square foot basis, that's about $7.02. On a per square meter, it's about $75.56 per square meter. In terms of the development charge comparison from your current to the calculated, the chart that you're seeing on the screen is reflected of a single detached home. So as of right now, your current charges are at $36,677. Again, with the removal of general government, which is your studies, but then with the revision of all the other services, we're just slightly above your current charges at $37,147. Now, keep in mind, with the 80% phase-in during the initial year of your development charge bylaw, that $37,147 would actually equal to $29,718. So there is that 20% reduction at the end of the day once we implement the new bylaw. Similarly, with non-residential, as you can see, again, whether you look at the square meter or square feet, it's both presented for you. But on the per square meter side, that's about $69.49 that you're currently at. We're now moving towards $75.56. And again, with the with the mandatory phase-in of 80%, that charge actually drops to $60.45 in your first year, or $5.62 on a per square foot basis. So with that being said, I'd just like to finalize the presentation. We do have some survey slides for you here. So as of right now, as you can see, the purple arrow there represents your current rates as of today. As you can see, the darker blue shade immediately to the left of it would equal your charges right now. As calculated from the development charge study. And then the very light blue that you're seeing on the right-hand side, from the bottom, is the 80% phase-in. Now, just keep in mind as you're reviewing these charts that the blue there is York Region's charges, the upper tiers charges for these municipalities. And then the ones above in that yellow gold would be the lower tiers or single tier, depending on who it is on this slide. And then as well, the green is the school board. So this table here is meant to provide you the all-in costs of a development charge, looking at all three levels of government. So the municipality, both lower and upper tier, as well as the school boards. So then similarly on the non-residential side, as I know within York Region, you do look at it from a retail or non-retail basis, where retail really reflects your commercial developments. So as you can see, again, with the purple, you're about, ninth from the top, eighth from the bottom. And then, with the updates, you are just moving, barely not moving a rank. You are still staying within that same area, just underneath Newmarket. But then again, with the 80% phase-in, you do drop slightly, but again, still within the similar ranking compared to some of your peers. And then lastly, on the non-retail side, which is really your industrial, again, you're basically, second from the last of this bar graph, really just being just above Georgina. So with that being said, again, your current right now is in the purple. With this update, you're not moving in ranking, and even with the 80%, you're still within the same spot. So with that being said, I just wanted to reiterate the timelines. We've undertaken, obviously, the public meeting today, and I understand that staff will be providing you with a report during the General Committee on March 5th, and then we'll be back again on March 26th to present the bylaw for your consideration. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Council, the recommendations that report number FIN 24-006 be received. 2, that the development charges background study and proposed development charges bylaw be received as presented. 3, that any new comments, questions, and suggestions arising from the statutory public meeting be referred to staff for consideration. And 4, that council hereby determines that no further public meetings are required under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997. Someone want to move that recommendation? Councillor Gilliland, Councillor Gardner, any comments or questions to the report, to our presenter? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. And thank you to the report. I just want to spend a little bit more time on the phasing so I understand it. So perhaps if we can, just to put that graph back up that showed the residential DC survey, single detached. So you stated in your comments that after we enact the DC study bylaw, that we're only eligible to collect 80% of the DCs in the first year, 85 in the second, 90, 95, and so forth. And so I guess what I'm still trying to grasp is, as it shows there on the graph itself, we're actually going to collect less money than we currently do. The current rate is, I think you say it's 36,000. In our first year, if we get 80%, I think you quoted the number was around 29,700 and so forth. Have we done any calculations to, I guess, understand what that lost amount is as compared to the 36,000? Or
Mr. Wainwright, Van Kessel.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we are planning a report that will come forward that will have the details on what the full impact is of the phase-in, any of the exemptions and changes that have resulted as to new legislation, and that is planned for April, May, in that time frame.
Perfect.
Councillor.
Thank you. And then as a follow-up, either through you, Mr. Chair, to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel or the presenter, is there any requirement for the developer to pass these savings on to the residents? I think I know the answer, but I just put it out there.
I think we all know the answer to that, but go ahead.
Through the mayor, a great question. No, there is nothing written in the legislation that they have to pass that savings.
Counselor?
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. One, in terms of the methodology, you talked about identifying the needs, then doing some costing. Then based on that, you kind of figure out what the relevant DC charges should be. We've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, significant cost escalation, especially associated with a variety of different projects. How have you taken that into consideration when you're looking at identifying the costs of the various structures and needs for the municipality over the next 5 to 10 year horizon? Through you, Mr. Chair, to either Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel or the presenter.
Stan?
Through the mayor, great question, Councillor. So through our work and review with the capital budgets with staff, this did come up where we were taking a look at certain capital projects, and if you take a look at what's currently in your budget now relative to maybe perhaps how it was identified, if it was identified in a previous iteration of a capital budget, there were a lot of cost escalations due to, again, whether it's COVID, this is our new plateau. At the end of the day, we had thought that, that supply chain maybe would be a little bit better now that COVID has kind of, I guess, been accepted as the norm, moving forward. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is the cost escalations are here to stay. So, through the years of 2021, 2022, and into 2023, we've seen a number of projects, go up anywhere from, say, 20% all the way up to 100%, even more, depending on the nature of the works. So those costs are actually included within the development charge study. So if you have an estimate where it's now, 50% higher or 60% higher, well, that's the cost of doing business. And that's the cost of actually undertaking these capital works. So those costs are reflected within this project, within this DC study. And that's why you see, with the charge, even though we've reduced the number of services, there was a lot of exemptions that we can't include anymore. Even with these cost escalations, as well as the increase within the the growth forecast, we're still able to come up with a charge that's slightly higher than what you currently have.
Great, thank you. I just wanted confirmation that we've taken that into consideration. And my final question through you to Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel. In the growth forecast summary, it talks about the residential unit increase, and it identifies 5,899 units over a 10-year horizon. Recently, this council had adopted the housing pledge and identified a goal of building 8,000 units to 2031. How do we reconcile those two pieces?
Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So as far as the estimated growth that's included in here, we looked at a number of factors, including what's recommended in the official plan, plus the growth target, and we took a more conservative approach for this. That being said, should we actually make the 8,000 or have more? What it means is we end up advancing some growth. And part of the study includes a post-period benefit. So essentially you're bringing part of that forward and you're doing some growth ahead of when you originally planned.
Thank you. So I guess it's fair to say that it's better to understate than overstate in this case. Thank you. That's it.
Councilor Gallo?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I did have similar questions about the phasing in and the 80%. Forgive my ignorance, but this is the first time we're doing this. This is the
Through the mayor, that's correct.
Thank you. What are we obligated to develop a new DC bylaw? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Mrs. Wainwright Van Kessel?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So our current bylaw expires at the end of March. If we do not have another bylaw in place at that time, we can't collect development charges. So we don't have to have one, but if we want to continue the revenue, then we do need to have one.
Councilor?
Okay, it doesn't continue status quo. In terms of capital expenditures and planned 10-year capital expenditures that governs some of these numbers, we're near the completion of the active transportation master plan, in which there's some, if council chooses to move forward on them, some significant capital projects there. Has anyone looked at that draft plan to incorporate any of those potential capital projects that would ultimately be reflected in the DC bylaw. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Wainwright. Oh, Mr. Ramuno.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councilor Gallo, I raised that question at our last meeting, and staff advised me that they have been working with financial staff and the consultant to incorporate some of those future projects. That's my understanding, that that's been factored into the new DC bylaw.
Council.
Is there any way through you, Mr. Mayor, that I could see kind of the details around that? That there are some, I mean, it's in its draft form right now, but I suspect it's not going to change much from where it is. It is coming back to the committee and then to council and then hopefully approved. But obviously not right now. But I'd love to understand better what we've captured in there. They're significant and they're important, and I don't want to miss them, and that's why I want to make sure that we're doing a thorough job capturing them. So at some point between now and whenever the next meeting.
Ms. Wainwright and Council, can we get that maybe when it comes to committee in the report that you mentioned?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we can include that in the report for March 5th.
Thank you, Councilor.
That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? We have to waive procedure to allow him for as a delegate. This is different from. Yes. If you wanted to speak and do waive procedure and allow him, it's up to you guys. I don't know if he wants to either. He hasn't made any. So, not seeing any other questions. I'm going to call the vote. It's on eScribe. I apologize. Clerk told me that we are doing it on eScribe. So if you guys can get your eScribe up. Councilor Gillen? Councilor Gillen's yes. That carries. And thank you very much. Thank you. Council confirming bylaw. Someone like to move that. Councilor Gardner, Councilor Gallo. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Motion to adjourn. Councilor Thompson, Councilor Gallo. I was going to say Councilor Kim, but he's actually here. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries.